and speaking to that, one of the things that stood out to me when most of us watched a video of George Floyd's murder, and hearing someone say on the video, he's a human being. One of the things I want to ask you is, what do you think is the way that we can work towards helping law enforcement officers see us as humans first? Humans who just happen to be born Black instead of gangsters or thugs or anything else or less than that they see us as. I realize that, you know, like you said, there's some bad apples in police departments. Yeah, there's some bad people out there of all races, but it seems that what keeps happening with law enforcement, this seems to just be a recurring thing where we're not seen as people first, seen as criminals first, or somebody who's done something, or somebody who deserves to be mistreated or to be shot, instead of seeing people as people. And I just want to know, what do you think? What is the way you think that law enforcement can remedy that problem?
Well, it all comes back to training, because again, Atlanta is different than other police departments because the culture in Atlanta is so different than other cities. In Atlanta, of course, we have this great sensitivity to the civil rights and human rights of people because of the history, political history of the city. That almost happens almost nowhere else. So our police are exposed over and over again to, these cultural lessons and cultural reminders that most police departments don't even experience. So the typical example is, if our police, when they go through the police academy, they go to the King Center and visit. They go to the Civil Rights Museum. They talk to some older civil rights activists, right? They get exposed to them. But in another city, almost anywhere else in America, once you go through the police academy, that's it. You graduate, and then you're on the street with the biases that you had prior to you entering into the police academy without them being changed. So if you had prejudices and racial ideas about biased ideas about particular groups, you still got those biases, even though you've completed training as a police officer. So it goes back to that level of exposure. I think most police departments have to have, because I can tell you, when I was in the academy, we were exposed to what I would call biased interpretations of certain groups, because we were training on how to deal with these different ethnic groups. And so there was, I believe in retrospect, there was some bias in that to say, hey, this group here is dangerous, or these people historically will behave this way in confinement. And a lot of it wasn't necessarily the trainers that were passing on that information. It was standardized videotapes that we watched for situations. And so it goes back to that training to break those biases. I mean, there are some general behaviors that you might attribute to a group, but of course, every person is an individual. And so that's the tug and pull there for police. And so it's more cultural sensitivity, more cultural awareness of individuals, of the people that you're trying to serve. You know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was getting into law enforcement, there was a push to try to diversify police departments, and they had done all these studies that said that, well, whether it's fire, police, or corrections, you need to have a mix that reflects the community that's being served, because they felt that would fill the gap if people saw more faces that were like theirs responding in these emergency situations. But it's not just having a token or a reserved Black guy over here that can deal with, Uncle Joe and Big Mama on occasion. Everybody's got to have that sensitivity, right? Everybody's got to know that. Big Mama, right? I was joking, but you guys just be real. I mean, just that, African Americans have to know about the Asian community, right? Have to know about the Hispanic community, and vice versa. And so it's got to be cultural cross-training that needs to happen so that people can unlearn these biases that have been ingrained in them consciously and unconsciously since childhood.
Right, exactly. Well, thank you. My last question is, as a premier city, what can the city of Atlanta do to help lead the change that America so desperately needs?
Well, I think Atlanta is uniquely positioned to do just that. I think that because of the culture here, because of the history here, the Atlanta way is the way that we can be an example to the rest of the country. Atlanta, even pre quote unquote civil rights movement, had a history of the African American leadership that was principally, Caucasians and African Americans here in Atlanta historically. And they've always had a history of communicating and talking, even though not always, wasn't the best relationship, but there was always a door between leaders in the African American community and leaders in the white business community that could talk about issues. And, it was 60 years anniversary of the Atlanta student movement that desegregated Atlanta. Now, most people think, and say, oh, wow, that's when the civil rights movement happened in Atlanta. But Atlanta had an ongoing civil rights movement, but it didn't have a history of activism or demonstrations. But there were many lawsuits and negotiations in Atlanta in and around the desegregation of the schools, desegregation of public facilities. Matter of fact, Dr. Mays, president of Morehouse in the 1940s, he filed a lawsuit for public accommodations in the 1940s. The NAACP chapter back in 1919, and James Weldon Johnson and some other notable, I think A.T. Walden, a lot of these schools that are named in our community for these individuals from the early 1920s and 30s, they negotiated the building of Booker T. Washington High School because the white community wanted to build Henry Grady High School, and they wanted to float a public bond to pay for it. Well, the African American community, they sat down and they negotiated, and they said, if you're not going to build us a school, then we're not going to vote for you to have a school. Why would we do that? Why would we don't have an elementary school? And that's how E.R. Carter, E.A. Ware, and Booker T. Washington all came about. And that's why if you look at Booker T. Washington High School and Henry Grady High School, they're the exact same height, and the original buildings are the exact same square footage. And so with that type of history and legacy, Atlanta can lead the way in demonstrating to say that it's all right to sit across the table for someone and have a discussion. It's okay to exchange these ideas. And of course, individuals, groups, we're not going to always agree, but it's the history of Atlanta that has made it special. I mentioned the Atlanta student movement. It was that type of dialogue that made Atlanta desegregate. And there were two people, Robert Woodruff, who was president of Coca-Cola, and Mayor Hartsfield. Mayor Hartsfield, he didn't have a high school education. Longest serving mayor of Atlanta. Robert Woodruff, of course, he was highly educated, president of Coca-Cola Company, had been all over the world. And they were resisting desegregation of a lot of public facilities. And of course, obviously the downtown businesses. And so Robert Woodruff, who for a long time was thought to be the shadow mayor of Atlanta anyway, had told Hartsfield about his experiences in South Africa and said when the students started demonstrating and picketing downtown, they shut Rich's department store down on the Easter weekend. They deprived Rich's of over $10 million in 1960 money, okay? Not $10 million in today's money, $10 million in 1960s money. And of course, Rich's was the biggest department store in the whole Southeast during the United States between here and California. The biggest retail concern beyond that was Macy's in New York. And so that was a tremendous blow to them. But Woodruff had imparted to Hartsfield and then to Ivan Allen, who came in after him. He said he didn't want to see Atlanta torn up the way that South Africa was torn up with war and strife and these other southern cities. And so the leadership in Atlanta knew that, the Black leadership knew that. And so they continued to fund the students, they continued to dialogue. And so Atlanta was desegregated after about a year, for all intents and purposes, without a lot of bloodshed. But there was a lot of tough talk and negotiation so that we don't repeat those mistakes that have been made around the world. And so the dynamics are different in other cities, but the tools are the same. You have to talk to people, you have to sit across from them, and then there has to be an acknowledgement and appreciation of people's differences, because we are all different. We all have a unique experience in the world. Even though we come from similar civil rights legacies, they're still different. You're a woman, I'm a man. I can't tell you about being a woman, and I don't think you can. Women try, but I don't think women can tell you.
I can't tell you a thing about being a man.
But we can have a conversation and a dialogue to get there. And I think that's where the Atlanta way actually came from, is out of that legacy of having that dialogue and conversation and doing what's best for the whole rather than the half or the individual.
Michael Julian Vaughn, thank you so much for this wonderful education. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time and your contribution. Black Women in Radio is so lucky to have had you to share your thoughts and your experiences with us today. And I am certain that we will be inviting you back to speak with us again. You were a great guest.
Oh, thank you. I love being here, and I appreciate Black Women in Radio.
Thank you. We appreciate you too. Felesha, do you have any questions or closing remarks from Mr. Bond?
I am over here just bursting at the seams because this conversation is so much needed, and I so appreciate you coming on board. And we're asking you to come again because our goal is to keep the conversation going, and you have certainly done that. And there's so many points that we need to convey, I think, to the community so that we can get into a mindset that moves us forward. Please come back again.
Oh, I'll come back anytime. Just let me know. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.